All right, we're going to pick up where we left off from the last demonstration about strings, and I'm going to talk to you about concatenation. Basically, concatenation is just adding more to the end of something. It's like appending a string with another string. So what we're going to do is go ahead and I'm actually going to create a new set of PHP because right now you can see here what I'm doing is I'm echoing a bunch of breaks. I want to go ahead early on and I'm going to show you an alternative to doing that. It's in some ways, it might seem a little bit fussier because you're adding a bunch of ending tags for PHP and so forth, but ultimately it's kind of a better practice, and you're going to see it professionally done a whole lot more in content management system frameworks like WordPress and Joomla and things like that if you move on to getting into those things. So what I want to show you is how you can very easily embed PHP so that you're not having to do a bunch of this kind of stuff like where you're echoing out break tags. So what we're going to do is we're going to just end the PHP tag here, and then what we can do is I'm just going to put a horizontal rule right there, and that's just regular old HTML, okay? And then what we can do is come down here and open up a new set of PHP tags, and then you'll see what we're doing is we are going to be basically just declaring our variable from the last time. So we're just cleaning up our code a little bit, and now what I can do, instead of having this break, I've got the horizontal rule up here, and so I can get rid of this echo break tag. And the other thing that I can go ahead and do is put my PHP tag here, ending PHP. And I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to keep doing this over and over again. And let's get rid of that space. This is also sort of referred to as refactoring, so like cleaning up your code. Alright, now in between here, what we can do is just put a regular HTML break like that. Alright, and so now what you've got is something that's a little bit more succinct, and we've got this final tag to clean up. And then the other thing I can do is go ahead now and put another horizontal rule here so that we're separating our sections. And then what you could do is you could come in to the body, and you can just give it like a regular heading level. So something that we really didn't do so far is put an H1 on the page. So if we wanted to put an H1, we could put simple strings, okay? And then down below it, we can make a subcategory, and we can call this curly braces. Echo. Let's do echo print, and using, I spelled that right? No. Using curlies. Okay. And underneath this horizontal rule, we'll put another H2 down here. This also is going to clean up your page so that you can kind of see things visually a little bit better. And then in this H2, we'll talk about, I guess, using curlies. Yeah. Using curlies. Continued. Okay. We even put parentheses here. Okay, and so now we're down below with our final HR. So we're going to go ahead and put our last H2 to get us up to where we want to start talking now about concatenation. Okay, and let's go ahead and save that, and let's just double check and make sure that I didn't do some kind of silly stuff. And then now at least we've got stuff that are like separated, okay? And then you can start to, visualize the sections and so on. And I'm just going to really quickly to make it even simpler to look at. Since we don't have any styling in this, we're not applying a style sheet or anything. There, it's even easier to see now. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about concatenation. And, well, what is concatenation? Concatenation is where you're, like I said before, you're appending things with other things. So let's just start off with some PHP tags here. And so you don't have to watch me type. I'm going to go ahead and paste some stuff in. And I'm going to just clean that up a little bit. And so what I did was I went ahead and I created some potential variables that you might have in a page where you're trying to build, let's say, a pathway to a set of images or something. Well, a lot of times in these beginning demos you might wonder, well, why would I have to break everything into all these little bits and pieces and parts? Why couldn't I just do it in static HTML and type the whole thing out? It's kind of hard to see at the beginning of the class how that's useful, to break things into all these parts and write in all this logic structure, to make these simple pages. But you got to remember that these simple pages are really for learning purposes. If you can imagine exploding the scale of what we're doing, monumentally, then you would see that it would be close to impossible to manage a website that potentially has like thousands of pages. You could never do that in static format, and so you have to write logic into it to generate things. And so right now I'm just making up some variables. Realistically, you would probably have these variables passed into the page from some other place in your application, but for now we're just going to make them so that we can use them. Okay, so let's say that we have this is the main folder where we would store our images, and let's say that we would have two sets of images. One would be thumbnails and the other would be like the larger ones, the full-size ones. And let's say that somehow we're getting a file name passed into the page, for some kind of user request. Maybe somebody clicked a link and this was the value that got assigned to the variable of file name. Okay, and we need to figure out how to build a path. And so let's talk about, first of all, let's just figure out how we can even get an image to show up here. So what I went ahead and I did is, if I go back in here, I went ahead and I just found a picture on the web. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and right-click this and save the image, and we're going to put it in htdocs. I'm going to put it in dev, and I'm actually going to create a folder that's going to match what we're talking about over here. So in my dev, in fact, I'll scoot it over so you can see a little bit better. Here's what we're talking about. So because my strings folder is in dev, I'm going to create my images folder inside of dev. So let's call that images, hit create, and then I'm going to create another folder, because if you look over here, I'm going to create an image called large. Yeah. And we're going to actually save this little elephant picture in here, and I'm just going to call it elephant. I think it was a PNG or something. Pretty sure it was. Nope, it's a JPEG. I'm looking at the top up here. Okay, so I'm just going to borrow this picture. Now, the thing is I need to make a smaller version. I'm going to do that really fast so you don't have to watch me do it. Okay, so I just took a second to do that really quick. I'll show you my file system, and you can see here that what I did was inside of images I have that large one, which you saw me create, and then what I did was I made a new folder in here called thumbs, and I made a tiny little version of the elephant. It's like 75 by 75, whereas the other one's like 300 by 300. Okay, so that's where you see them in the file system. Corresponds to this. Okay, now so that you can see something in action here, what I can do is go down here, and let's just say that we're going to get this picture to show up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say img src for image source, and right now I'm just going to leave that blank because I'm just going to type regular old HTML, and I'm going to put the alt, and we'll make that just equal something blank for now. Alright, and then what I want to do is I want to be able to dynamically build the pathway and pull that file using variables. And so this is a good example of where concatenation is really handy when you've got like a lot of pieces and parts and you need to string them together, especially to build, file pathways. Then you could do something like put your PHP tags embedded in here. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and say echo. Remember, you have to say echo, otherwise it's sort of like it's thinking in its head, but it's not saying it out loud to the browser. So we're going to say echo, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the variable name for image folder, and you see it starts to auto-complete for me, image folder. And now to get the next thing to show up without putting spaces or any of that in between, I want to put a dot. The dot is the concatenation mark, okay? And what that means is it's sort of like a plus symbol, and it's going to go ahead and print. And what I want to do right now is I want to go ahead and let's just, for now, let's say that we're going to print the thumb size, okay? The thumbnail size. So let's say that we're going to go to the thumbs folder, and then we want to actually grab the file name, okay? So file name, like that, and then I'm going to terminate it. Now, notice something. I called mine elephant.jpg, and in my example I have bullet because I think in the lecture notes that are like on the HTML web page for strings, it uses an example called bullet. So let's change that so that it'll actually work for us. Okay, so it's elephant.jpg. And let's leave alt blank for now, okay? And so right now, let's just recap it. We've got image source equals, and then we've got our this is an HTML double quote. It's not like PHP string or anything. It's just regular HTML, which designates that this is the value of an attribute. So right here, it'd be like typing out the pathway, and then here's where we end the value for this attribute of source, okay? And then we've got another attribute of alt for alt text, and we have an empty value there, which we would fill in later. So for the value for the source file, that's when we're going to concatenate all these pathways together. Let's save this, and let's go do a test and see how it looks. Let's do refresh, and look, there's our thumbnail, okay? It shows up right there. Now, let's do another little trick, okay, where if we were to create a link, this is one of the reasons why it's kind of nice to have all these different variable pathways that you can sort of string together. Let's say that we want this thumbnail to actually be a link, all right? Well, what we can do then is we're going to wrap an anchor link around it, okay? And so let's go ahead, and we're going to say href equals, and let's just put the basic syntax here for right now. And I'm just going to end that, and then let's put our ending a tag at the very end, okay? And now the thing is that this is now a clickable link, this picture is. So if we click that, we need to put the destination here, okay? So here is where we would basically do exactly what we've done here, except instead of using the thumbnail directory, we're going to use the full size directory. So I'm going to copy this so I don't have to retype it all, paste it, and where it's got the href, I'm going to go here where it says thumbs, and I'm going to change that to full size. Okay, and I'm going to save that, and let's do another test real quick. Okay, so now it's a link, right? I click it, takes me to my full size picture, right? So now I think you can kind of get a sense of how that could actually be very useful in a larger scheme, a larger scale, especially whenever you're dynamically pulling for a gallery of thumbnails and you need to be able to click them and so on and so forth. There are lots of other reasons that you would use concatenation. You know, like you might have something that would be a welcome message that says hello so-and-so, and you might concatenate those two things together where so-and-so is the variable. Anyway, but I think you get the idea of how concatenation works, so I'm going to go ahead and end this concatenation demo here, and then when you move on to the next one, we will be talking about quotes and how to deal with single and double quotes and when to use them.